Hello and welcome to my place. This is going to be something of a mixed up piece, but hopefully you'll make some sense of it. It's an impromptu take on some of the things that are happening, particularly in and around New Zealand at the moment. But before I begin, I just want to say to everyone listening and watching that I'm really into hate. That's right. You heard me right. I'm really into hate. In fact, I'm so into it, I've actually made a meme about hate, which hopefully you'll see in this video. The only legitimate place for hate is to hate ideas that legitimize hate. So that's where I want to begin today. And I hope you'll give some thought to that as we move on. Now, what we've got is an eclectic bunch of cuttings and newspaper clips and little bits of videos and things that I'm going to cobble together in no particular order because I just want to get this message out there. But some of the things that I hope you'll think about with me, along with me, is the idea of freedom of speech, or the responsibility of the media to put things in some sort of objective and unbiased way. I also want to give some thought about really the way the Christchurch mosque attacks have been politicized by so many different groups in so many different ways. And I guess by doing this, putting it together, it may look just like I'm another one of those. But I'll tell you this, I at least gave a couple of weeks or so before I began this. I mean, the way people have used this as an excuse to push their own agenda right from day one has never ceased to amaze me. Before the blood had even dried on the steps of those mosques, there were people using it as a platform to push their own ideas so that they could legitimize their own rants, if you like. So you can see me in that light as just another one of the many that are pushing their own barrow. But if I'm pushing a barrow, then I hope it's the right one. And I'll let you make up your mind about that. I'll let you make up your mind as to whether I'm just another one of those haters as well. Okay, so perhaps I'll begin with a screen grab from my phone. It looks to be on the 16th of March 2019. Incidentally, the 15th of March, the day of that horrific event, was our 39th wedding anniversary, and we were away from media and phones, and except for our cell phone. And when news broke, these are the sort of comments we picked up on almost immediately. Hate does not prosper here. Those who harbour an ugly dislike of different races, religions, and cultures live on the margins of public acceptance, not given newspaper space, left to roam the internet for sites that reflect their prejudices. If their attitudes have been politely avoided rather than confronted in this country, they are more likely to be confronted now. The events of March 15th, 2019 will ring loud in the nation's memory forever. We know now, if we did not before, how deadly hatred can be. I just want to make a few comments, a few thoughts about something like that. Commentary. It all sounds reasonable enough and completely rational, a response to be expected, but I want to just see if I can pick that apart a little bit further. Those who harbour an ugly dislike of different races, religions, and cultures. Now, on the face of it, that's a fair enough comment. I mean, there is no excuse for an ugly dislike of different races. I think everyone accepts, or anyone of goodwill and with any sort of sense of rationality will accept that you cannot change the race you were born into. It's nothing to be ashamed of, and, well, you can be proud of it if you like, but you really had nothing to do with it, did you? So I don't even think it's a source of pride. It just is. But anyway, putting that aside, there, as I say, there's no excuse for a dislike of different races. I completely agree with that. But then we come to these next couple of words. An ugly dislike of different religions. Is there any case for disliking a religion? Well, probably you wouldn't think so in today's PC world. But in actual fact, what would you think today of the religion, say, of people who sacrificed their children to the sun god, or uh, who commit any number of widely accepted uh, anti-social, anti-human, subhuman, even if you like? Who would agree with a religion that crossed all the boundaries of decency as we know and understand it today and are widely accepted around the world? So you see, quite frankly, there are religions, there are belief systems, there are philosophies that we should have an ugly dislike of, that we should protest about. I mean, I don't know about you, but there are certain beliefs, for instance, on the continent of Africa, where they believe and where they practice female genital mutilation. And if you think that's acceptable, and if you think it's wrong to have an ugly dislike of that, well, I think you need to think again. I hope you see where I'm getting at with this. And so the same with cultures. Now, this word culture is banding out a lot, and not everything about a culture is good. For instance, I've just mentioned a cultural practice based perhaps on some religious beliefs, and sometimes perhaps it's not even connected to religious belief, but certainly some ideology, some cultural set of traditions that have affected a group of people, such that this sort of female mutilation is acceptable and expected. So I have a great deal of problem, and I think with this sort of attitude, and I think cultures, we need to look at that word cultures again, and realize that there are certain things that in cultures, take for instance Māori culture, where a common way to greet people is the hongi, the rubbing of noses, and believe me, that there's something charming about it. Well, charming if you haven't got a serious nasal problem, but uh, and it takes a deal of courage to get in someone's face and be prepared to trust your proximity to someone who's got quite a reputation. I mean, in the old days, in the older times when hongis were less perhaps ceremonial than what they are today, but just a conforming way of greeting people onto the marae. So that sort of cultural practice, I don't see any harm in, and of course, they're actually things that should be preserved and appreciated. But then there are cultural practices like the one I've mentioned before, that are certainly not acceptable and that we should be protesting about wherever they occur. The margins of public acceptance. Well, some people have ideas for which they are marginalized. I would think of a number of religions or belief systems in which people are hardly accepting of them anymore, and that sometimes they're marginalized for good reasons and sometimes for bad, and they're not given newspaper space, but they are left to roam the internet for sites that reflect their prejudice. Now, this idea about giving newspaper space, obviously an editor has control of their newspaper. Directors and share and owners of private enterprises, even public enterprises, have to have a way of deciding what will get airtime, what will get oxygen, if you like to use another term. But the problem being, if that isn't dished out fairly, or if it's given indiscriminately, or if it's even given if it even occurs as a result of a bias, then you're going to have some real issues. And I like what John F. Kennedy had to say about that. And perhaps I'll take a break now just to show you what I mean. Well, here we are with another meme. This time, as I mentioned, something John F. Kennedy said: "When you make peaceful revolution impossible, you make violent resistance inevitable." So we saw in that last caption how there was a deliberate policy of keeping things on the margins, not giving oxygen, not giving airtime, not giving space for certain objectionable views. But has that been a catalyst for what violence we've seen in Christchurch? That's my question to you. There's no doubt this despicable person, was absolutely warped in their thinking along the lines of racial superiority, along the lines of what means he used to bring attention to his ideology. But here's something to think about. When things are pushed to the margins, you don't change the thinking of the person that's in the margins. Ignoring them, not giving them oxygen, not giving them a platform, that might be the way to keep things peaceful to a point. But if that person can't be talked out of his position, if you can't rationally change his mind, if you can't give a good argument for why they should think differently, then really all you're doing is suppressing what in actual fact could be some truth. You are pushing something aside that perhaps needs to be looked at. Now, is that hate speech? Am I promoting violence? No. In no way do I provoke violence or hatred against anyone. But as I hope I've made clear, hatred towards ideas is a legitimate place for hatred. But who gets to decide what ideas are hateful? The media? The government? Experts? Now, I'm not delegitimizing any of those, but I am saying that one of the striking markers of the beginning of sophisticated civilization occurred 3,000 years ago when the Greek agora, I think it's called, came to be, a forum, the forum for discussing the pros and cons of something. And of course, the Greek philosophers led the world in discussing serious ideas on a rational basis and used these forums to make decisions about public policy, about culture, about all sorts of things. And I think that the degree of thin-skinned people around who cannot accept offence, who will not have any discussion, who will not dialogue, who take active part in pushing views into the margins, in marginalising people, in marginalising views. I think we've seen so much of this that extremists like Breivik and this other chap, this other killer, are to some extent driven to these extremes by this lack of dialogue, by this lack of thrashing out in the public square what ideas are good ideas, what ideas are bad ideas, what ideas are hateful ideas, and what ideas we need to encourage. In actual fact, people who marginalise people actually are saying, I can't learn from you, there's nothing here, there's nothing of interest, there's nothing we can learn from these people. And of course, in some sense, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because when they're driven to violence, driven to these extreme horrific acts, of course, we can all pat ourselves on the back and say, well, yes, we were right in marginalising these people. And that's the attitude that's been taken in the previous caption, which I'll just return to here for a minute. They live on the margins of public acceptance, not given newspaper space. Now, we've all heard this talk about echo chambers. Well, guess what creates echo chambers? People that are not given a platform for speaking, a genuine platform, not to spew out their hate, but to air ideas. Hate ideas, love people. See, they're driven to roam the internet for sites that reflect their prejudices, because people like Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Southern, and as we've seen recently, Jordan Peterson even, are being deplatformed. And they're very interesting people. I don't agree with all of them. I don't agree with all of their stances, but nonetheless, I think they need to be heard. And I think if this terrorist attack has taught us anything, it should be that we are willing to listen, willing to give a platform, willing to dialogue, willing to question, willing to interrogate even these ideas. Because not to do so is to court the very extremism that we hate to see. If their attitudes have been politely avoided rather than confronted in this country, they are more likely to be confronted now. Well, what does that mean? Does it mean they're confronted by being deplatformed? They're confronted by being shouted down and not given an opportunity to speak? I hope the events of March 15th, 2019 will ring loud in the nation's memory forever as a reminder of the importance of dialogue, of a reminder that we need to examine carefully all ideologies, as a reminder that listening is a simple courtesy. If you are so immature or so insecure in your own position that you cannot listen, you cannot dialogue, you cannot question, you cannot give an audience to, you cannot stand the public uh, appraisal of ideas, then I suggest you belong in the ages before the Greek agora. You belong in that primitive place where these things were unknown. Okay, we're back, and this time the picture that looks like it's going to be out of sync. Anyway, we've been talking about, I mentioned earlier that many people were using this horrible incident to further their own agenda. So this is a caption of an opinion page on the Northern Advocate. I haven't got the date there, but let's go with that. And the issue is about racism. Let me just bring that back if I can. There you go. Our country has institutionalized racism within its day-to-day operations. We protect white racists under the guise of free speech. Count how many times the same writers get access to newspapers and promote white is right. One country, one way, blah, blah. If we were truly equal in this country, 80% of the prison population would be Pākehā. Well, Hilda, the problem with racism is that we conflate the issues when we say what's wrong with someone else on the basis of their colour, which is, to my mind, just what you've done. You can't speak against whites unless you can speak against blacks. And as we've already ruled that out, we need to come to the conclusion, we need to come to the realization that any racism, if it's wrong at all, it's wrong for all. So if you have something against the way writers get access to newspapers, then what are the ideas that give people this undeserved privilege? That's the attack that you should be making, not the fact that it's white people or any coloured people, but the fact that some newspapers, whoever runs newspapers, editors, whatever, shareholders, whatever, government policies, whatever, there's something wrong with the way access and airtime is given to certain views. And I agree with you to a certain extent. There is something wrong. There is a bias. I think there is prejudice there. I think there is discrimination. But we've already ruled out, I hope by now, that saying black this, blah, blah, white that, blah, blah, it's not the way forward. It's not the race that is the issue. It is the predominant view among groups that can be identified along ethnic lines. But it's not a race thing per se. It's an ideological thing. We have to examine the ideas that people are holding in their heads and hold collectively and agreeably amongst each other that we disagree with. And we need to rationally account for those ideas and critique those ideas, dialogue with those ideas. Now, here's the thing. The last sentence that I've highlighted here. If we were truly equal in this country, 80% of the prison population would be Pākehā. Now, that, on the face of it, is a very racist statement. But I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, because I believe in the benefit of the doubt. I think what you mean to saying is that if an equal proportion of our population were represented equally within our prison systems, then we could say there's some progress in this country. And I would agree with that. I don't want to see anyone in prison. Of course, that's an unrealistic goal. But if you don't aim at something, you won't achieve anything. If you don't have a goal, you won't know where to aim even. So, I want to ask a question. I think the statistic she's referencing is that 80% of the prison population happen to be Māori. And when you square that with the percentage of New Zealanders that are Māori, I think it's 15%. 15% of our total population is Māori. And yet 80% of the prison population are Māori. So there's a correlation thing going on here. Am I racist for bringing up these facts? Or does that point exactly to what I'm saying? It's not skin colour that determines whether or not you fall foul of the law, but it's your behaviour. And what drives behaviour? It's ideas. It's a sense. It's your sense of values, your sense of ethics. Those are the places we need to start. What are the values that people hold? What's wrong with the values? People hold them collectively, and they can fit along racial boundaries, but it's not the skin colour. That's racism. We've already deplatformed racism, if you like. We've dealt with that. So then let's squarely deal with the reality that if there is a disproportionate ethnic group within our prison systems, let's put all idea of the sense that it's because of their skin colour, let's put all of that behind us and start focusing on the real issues. What is the ideology driving these ethnic groups along certain ethnic lines? Or, to put it in another context, why are there so few whites represented there in comparison? What is it that they're getting right in that they are staying out of prison? Or if we refuse to give Hilda the benefit of the doubt, is she saying that the police are so corrupt they're targeting Māori people? The level of corruption in police forces, which, after all, probably has rather a high proportion of Māori people, if I'm not mistaken. They're so against their own people and so against the rights of these people that their corruption has resulted in this huge disproportionate measure of people in prisons. No, I think you have to think again. But this is just another issue that's come up out of the Christchurch attacks. The race card. I think we need to do better than this.